I want to give a little bit of background as to actually why I spend so much time in Ukraine and why I spend so much time in this city in particular, because there are beautiful women in lots of different countries, and definitely that is one of the big attractions. But it's not the only attraction to come here. So I want to give you a little bit of overview now about exactly why I chose to spend so much time here. So.
Experience.
Всем привет! Welcome back to another episode of the Vodka Vodcast with me, Connor Klein. I'm speaking to you from Odessa in Ukraine, the Black Sea. I'm actually in a place that's known as a kind of old corner Odessa. I'm gonna just confirm that's actually the name where I am. Ugolok Staroy Odessy. Just written there, so I learned that when I came here. But basically it's a place where a lot of people come. We're right in the city center. It's beautiful weather. It's the end of September. Can you imagine? It's like 28 degrees Celsius today, and there are a lot of weddings going on at this time of year, and people come to take photos. It's kind of a little corner, a little oasis of this kind of beauty with some, as you can see, the old bridge and the fountains that are here. Well, actually you can't see the fountains. You can just see the bridge in this shot, but that's basically what's around here. There's a little well over there, and there's like a little lookout point just here, and there are like lots of couples, so you're going to see that behind you, a little bit of extra cultural context for you here in Odessa. So today's episode is dedicated to someone. It's actually dedicated to one of my trolls. Trolls are a funny thing. I mean, obviously, I'm not talking to people who just write absolutely obnoxious, disgusting stuff that's either racist or sexist or something else just to insult you. But people who actually pursue you online, pursue metaphorically speaking, of course, they're just writing comments where they obviously don't like you, but they feel compelled to keep writing and leaving comments. So this one is to Arian1754. I did say when I replied to your comment that I would make a vodcast episode, and in this one I'm going to be talking about exactly why I spend so much time, especially in the summer, in Ukraine first of all, and also Odessa, because a common thread, I mean there are lots of threads of comments left on my channel, but one of them is the fact that the only reason I'm here is because there are beautiful women, there are hot chicks here, and that's the only reason for me to be here. And then you get a lot of comments like, hey, you're a sex tourist because you hang out in Odessa and they're beautiful girls. Well, you should look up the definition of sex tourist. First of all, they're basically people who pay for sex while on holiday. This channel does not advocate prostitution. Personally, I don't care about it very much. It doesn't affect me, so as long as it's voluntary, I don't really care so much. But you should respect the law. If you are involved in that, there are places where it's legal, I guess, to work and to consume that service, but that's definitely not what this channel is about. It's actually the opposite. So it's about meeting girls in real life, real girls that you don't actually pay for sex, which I found amusing is that it's a common thread. So I think what they're trying to get at is that, as opposed to actually being here for prostitution, what I assume he means is that this is the main attraction, and that that's something bad, as if it would be bad to come here just because there are beautiful women. That would make me a rational male heterosexual. So I want to give a little bit of background as to actually why I spend so much time in Ukraine and why I spend so much time in this city in particular, because there are beautiful women in lots of different countries, and even in Western Europe, it's not really so hard to meet them if you are obviously in the right social circles or you know to go to the right places. So whilst that is an attraction in Ukraine for sure for straight guys to come here, and that's why there are so many guys who actually travel to Ukraine at the moment exactly. I mean, tourism here is probably, I don't know, maybe there's going to be an official statistic somewhere, but I would imagine tourism from countries in North America and Western Europe is 99% male, and definitely from countries like Turkey or the Arabic countries, Israel as well. It's definitely heavily skewed in terms of younger guys who come here, so definitely that is one of the big attractions. But it's not the only attraction to come here, so I want to give you a little bit of overview now about exactly why I chose to spend so much time here. So the first thing that I'm going to go into is cost of living. Now, Ukraine, obviously since the Euromaidan revolution, just before it, because Yanukovych, the pro-Russian president, actually really kind of wrecked the economy. Not that the economy was strong when he inherited it, admittedly, but basically he wrecked it, and his son was trying to become this also this oligarch. So basically the country crumbled. I actually used to come here when it wasn't so cheap, maybe it's probably 7, 8, 9 years ago. it was more or less the same price level as going to Central Europe, so countries like Czech Republics, so like the big cities, like like Prague, for example, which no one would say today is a cheap city to go and visit. It's cheaper in London or New York, of course, but it's not super cheap like it would have been in the 90s. So I used to come here before the cost of living, obviously, in terms of foreign currency, so dollars or euros, whatever currency you're using. I used to come here anyways because I just love the city, but more about that in a minute. So the first thing I want to address is cost of living, because your experience in a place is to a large part dependent on how much money you have, first of all. Basically, it's dependent on your purchasing power, right? So your experience can be very different if you can afford to stay in a 5-star hotel and obviously party all night in the best club with bottles of champagne. I'm not saying that's the best way to have fun, but it's definitely going to be a different experience. And money and purchasing power gives you the option of experiencing different things. And that's one of the key factors in spending so much time in Ukraine at the moment, because since 2014 the currency has plummeted here. It's now recovered in the last year. I should point out the prices have, for me, they seem to have increased maybe about 20-25%, this kind of price range, but they're coming back up from a very low base. It was definitely the cheapest country I've been in Europe up until this year, for sure. And that just means your money goes so much further. So that's a huge factor to come here, right? I mean, it's just like the level of service that I get is not much different to what I would get in Western Europe or North America. Well, maybe North America is a bit different, that extra touch they go for personal service. But we'll say definitely compared to other parts of Europe, I wouldn't say there's a big difference. But when you go to pay and you take out your credit card, then you see a huge whopping difference there, at least 50%. My friend Danny, who's in some of my videos here in Odessa, he has a channel, Got a World to See, I'll link him below. Really great content. It's not just from here, it's also from around the world. He thinks from the higher end, things like best restaurants, clubs, bars, whatever, that's probably about 50% cheaper. And then for kind of normal things, it's actually even cheaper again, probably about 2/3, that's like 1/3 the price. So 66%, that was his kind of rough estimate. We can go and look up exactly what the statistics say, but what I always feel was missing in the statistics about cost of living differentials is really depends what you're going to do as a traveler here, and that's not representative of how the country is in general. So most of you are going to stay in a hotel or an Airbnb or rent an apartment or something like that. You're going to probably, especially if you watch my channel, you're going to be eating in good restaurants, solid good restaurants. You're going to be going out and enjoying the nightlife, going to nice bars, going to the best clubs, this kind of stuff. I know there's a different type of traveler, and they would focus on being a backpacker and maybe eating at the local market and buying stuff in the supermarket even. But I don't really make these videos for those kind of people. If you are watching, I hope you get great value out of it, but I don't really have you in mind, because that's actually not how I live when I'm traveling here. I definitely do go to the best restaurants. I don't necessarily need fine dining, something very formal, but I love food. So that's kind of when you see my videos, I'm trying to share my experience with you and communicate that. And if you're interested in having a similar one, like the Zara experience, as I call the channel, then this is why it's tailored in this way, because I do get messages also from you asking me to make budget stuff, but I've decided against that. So there you go, that's me kind of digressing a little bit as to main purpose of this podcast episode, but that's basically why you see me make the videos in that style. So for me, I would say it's actually a little bit cheaper than 50%, because I used to live in Munich in Germany, and that's the most expensive city in Germany, one of the most expensive cities in Europe. And I remember, because I did have a very high salary when I lived there, so I used to go to the best restaurants and used to go to the best clubs, used to go to the best bars, used to live in the city center, so I know what rent is like in the city center in Munich, in a nice place. And I would think it's definitely cheaper than 50% when I go to pay here. I mean, I just imagine what my lifestyle in Odessa would cost me in Munich. Well, it's going to cost at least 3 times as much from personal experience, even with the price increase in the last year. So cost of living just allows you to do so much more with, it allows you to experience different things. Like I always say, money is not objective in itself for me, but definitely affords you more possibilities in terms of what you can do and what you can experience. And that's, I think, this is the great value in earning money and making money for me personally. So that's something that's really, really important. Because I could go and live in other countries in the region. Like I go live in Moscow. If it were just about girls, for example, of course there are also beautiful women there. Or I go to Sweden, for example. Sweden also a great place for chicks. But the cost of living in Sweden is obviously 3 times. I mean, Stockholm is so expensive compared to here. So I would need to generate 3 times as much income per month in order to have the same experience. So this is a really, really important point to bear in mind, that cost of living, when you're choosing, if you are looking at having a more location-independent lifestyle, you can actually spend more than just a couple of weeks holidays somewhere, that you do look at the cost of living and what it's going to afford to you. I know that Central Europe, like cities like Budapest, are really popular now for digital nomads. These are the people who can move around pretty easily, work over the internet. But in Budapest, definitely, I've been there. I spent a week with a good friend there, James. We hung out, and he brought me to actually the best restaurants in Budapest. And it felt double the price of here. Like, and people who come from London think, oh, Budapest is so cheap, or they come from New York or LA or somewhere, and they're like, I'm just like, no, I think things doubled in price. So that kind of gives you a ballpark estimate, right? And of course, if you have unlimited money, or you inherited, or you just made it, and you made so much money you don't know what to do with, then you don't really care about these things. But if in any way you're price sensitive, and I think actually everybody likes to get good value for money. Let's be honest about it. Even if you have 50 million sitting in the bank, $50 million, 50 million euros, you still want to get value for money. Most people, I think it's a psychological thing. No one likes to just squander, especially if you made it yourself, through hard graft and applying yourself over many years. You don't like to just throw it away willy-nilly. So that's a huge factor to spend time in Ukraine. Odessa is a very touristic city, but now the high season is now over. I was here for a high season. I pay high season prices for accommodation. But now it's like I'm paying 25 euros a night for an apartment, a studio apartment, very nice one, right in the city center. I think a homeless shelter probably in Dublin or in London, it's probably per night going to cost you more. Probably, I don't know, I should look that up before I say it. But it still costs money to stay in those places. So a youth hostel there in Dublin or London, it's got to be about the same price I would expect in the city center. So that's the comparison. So you can just do a lot more with your money. That's a huge factor for me. The countries around it are more expensive. Like even Moldova is Chisinau is a little bit more expensive than here, even though the economic development of Moldova is definitely way behind this country, and definitely way behind the city, Odessa. It's definitely higher. Romania the same, definitely higher cost of living there. Belarus, Russia in the big cities like Moscow is way, way higher than here. So that's why I actually chose to spend my time in Ukraine at the moment. That's a big factor, number one. So got into that. I touched on food. I love the restaurants here. I'll be honest about you, I'm a glutton. I love the food, and of course, and if money was unlimited, I guess I could say the same about living somewhere else. But food in Ukraine in restaurants is particularly high standard. I would say just the kind of above average is excellent, and there's just a great diversity for me, anyways, my taste. So there's a lot of Italian food, a lot of Ukrainian, obviously. I don't like the Ukrainian every day, like borscht, vareniki, and the stews and the salads. I like them, but I wouldn't eat it ever more than once a week, if even. The other cuisine that I like to eat here in Odessa, or in Ukraine in general, is Georgian. Georgian food for me is just like, it's heavy, but man, is it good. So we're talking about hachapuri, hinkali, the different salads. Also, they have a lot of stews, so that's also something I just love. And there's obviously a lot of Japanese food and sushi. It's kind of international. So basically, you have a good mix of cuisine here. The standard is very high service. Also, shisha. I never smoked anything, actually, to be honest, until I started hanging out in this country and just enjoy shisha. I found it very social. So I'm talking about hookah. I'm not saying it's good for your health. I'm not saying that you should go and do it yourself, but I actually enjoy it. So this is something that the standard is really, really high in Ukraine compared to other countries that I've been to. In Western Europe, for sure, it was not as good, and it cost a fraction of the price here. And I also had really good shisha in more expensive places like Dubai, or say in Beirut in Lebanon, where it was excellent. But I have to say that's another factor. So this kind of food, entertainment, just the quality of it also I really, really enjoy. So that's a second reason to be here. Third reason is the political situation, I actually studied, in addition to becoming a lawyer and working at the European Commission, where I actually dealt a little bit with Ukraine and Russia and this region. I studied international relations, and I had a specialization in the former Soviet Union, so New Eurasia they called it at the time. I went to graduate school in the US to a top university, Johns Hopkins University, where I studied at SAIS School of Advanced International Studies, which was at the time voted #1 for this kind of specialization. And there I took on the former Soviet Union. So for me to come to Ukraine, there was actually a famous book, The Clash of Civilizations by Samuel Huntington. At the time was very popular when I studied about, and they had these fault lines where there would be conflict. This is post-Cold War, early 90s. You had The End of History and The Last Man by Francis Fukuyama. And he basically said it's over, there's no more competition. We found the right, the final template for everybody. People thought that was the end. We weren't searching for a new system, that everything would be settled around free market economics, capitalism, democracy. And Samuel Huntington had a book about how there would be these clash of civilizations. That, just to simplify, I'm not going to go into a political, make this a political video or an international relations tutorial, but basically that here in Ukraine was one of the places that he had the fault line between Russia, or the Russian sphere of influence, and the more European Western sphere of influence. And of course we had 2004, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, which forced a third round of voting, and eventually a pro-European president, Yushchenko, came to power. And then of course we had Euromaidan in end of 2013, beginning of 2014, where Yanukovych, who's subsequently been democratically elected, lost power in a revolt against his rule and his decision not to sign an association agreement with the EU. So I was actually there on the square at the time. So this is another thing that really interested me, to see the revolution take place, because I missed obviously all the stuff in the 90s or the end of the 80s here. That was off limits to me, and I was way too small. And then I was actually in the US during 2004. So 2013, 2014, I actually to see it close up firsthand, and then to read the media, whether it happens to be the mainstream media and their interpretation, or a lot of alternative media on the internet, who claim everything is a Western coup or whatever, and Russia, blah. They're extremely pro-Russian, a lot of it, and then actually been there and just see what a lot of BS half of this is, especially the stuff about the language at the time. So for me, it was really, you can see how passionate I am about it. And then to be here and see the results of the revolution, see what's actually happening, and then it just gives you a good personal experience, as opposed to relying on the media all the time, because media is a basic group of people with their own perspectives. Maybe they're good journalists, maybe they're just lazy journalists, maybe they're pushing a certain political agenda, and whether it's mainstream or so-called independent media, a lot of it's just like propaganda. Anyways, they either have sympathies or they're paid by another side to push that point of view, and they claim to be independent. Anyways, so that's basically one of the big reasons for me to also be in Ukraine. I'm also really interested to go to Russia and to Belarus. I was in Belarus a few times this year, and it's very interesting to see the difference in the people's mentality and how the country is run compared to Ukraine. It's really, really different. Lots of people, of course, they have a lot of commonality historically, and a lot of people, obviously most people in Belarus speak Russian, a lot of people do here, and they were both in the Soviet Union at the time. It's really digressed in terms of how young people there perceive the world. Belarus is starting to move in the same direction as Ukraine, from what I can see. And Russia, I don't go to often enough at the moment. I'm planning to go to Russia very, very soon. Spend a few months there and really get to know the country better than on my previous visits, which were quite short. So there you go. So that's a third reason for me to be here. It's just the political context and the culture, and that's really just like the historical culture and the new developing culture, whether it happens to be youth culture. That's very strong here in Ukraine. Definitely, I've seen big differences in the last 5 years in how young people dress, behave, their objectives. It's definitely moving more towards Europe quite rapidly, I would say. Maybe not as rapidly in Odessa itself, in the south, because we're a bit further away from Europe than we would be than, say, Lviv, which is really close because it's close to the Polish border, or Kiev, the capital. You definitely see a big change there. So this is all really, really interesting for me to see firsthand. And then, yeah, there are lots of beautiful girls here. That's definitely a big factor as well. Another important thing. Straight single guy, so of course this is a consideration where the pretty girls, of course. And this country, I'm going to make other videos about Ukrainian beauty and just beauty in the region in general. For me, this is the region in the world with the most beautiful girls on average. There are other regions where I think it's like southern Brazil, for example, very south of Brazil. Also, it's extremely high level of beauty amongst the girls there. That's why there's so many top models from Brazil. Also why there's so many top models from this region and from Russia, of course, as well. So that's definitely a factor. I would not, and I don't myself, come to Odessa in particular because of girls. I would say that's one of the least lowest priority reasons to be in Odessa. And it's just my experience. Of course, my friends, I made these videos, 5 reasons never to date a Ukrainian girl, followed by 5 more reasons never to date a Ukrainian. And that's just the frustrations of a lot of my friends that come here. So there was a Belgian guy I met, Sven, and recently he was here and he told me that if you come to Odessa and you think it's going to be easy to pick up girls, then you're going to go back with your ego on the floor, basically. It's like, don't come here for girls. Another American guy, Mark, he said, like, this is the hardest place in the world to pick up girls, maybe. Not sure. I'm sure there are harder places. I don't know if he went to Saudi Arabia or somewhere where that might be harder, at least harder to survive afterwards. So that's definitely it. I wouldn't come to Odessa for this reason. Basically, local girls in general don't like foreigners. Sven also said that he thought that being a foreigner, having traveled around the world, was always an advantage. Every other place he visited except this city, he said being a foreigner was a noticeable disadvantage, and I have to agree with that. Being a foreigner, especially if you don't speak Russian, big disadvantage. So I would never advise to come here for that reason. If that's your top priority, there are definitely places where it's going to be more interesting, easier. Well, you're more likely to have a success for sure, especially if you're North American or European. So that it is true that definitely there are pretty girls here, and you can see that in my videos, of course. There are lots of pretty girls. There are girls I'm hanging out with and girls I'm dating while I'm here, but that isn't particularly high priority for Odessa. Ukraine, definitely, but Odessa in particular, no. If that were a very high priority, I actually wouldn't spend so much time in this city. That's the honest truth about it. So you can see that I'm not maybe even as passionate when I start talking about girls here as I do. And that's why I made those other videos, to give you a more balanced view about what it's like if you come here with that objective in mind. As I said, there are better places. And I'm going to be going into that in later episodes of this podcast, and also my videos as I travel around the region. You're getting a real taste of what it's like, where I recommend, and maybe where I do go if I'm only interested in hooking up with chicks, with beautiful women. It's definitely not in this city. That is for sure. Now that's 4 reasons, and you see I listed the girls number 4. Then number 5 is the languages. As you know, I'm a language geek freak, whatever you want to call me on that, for that reason, or that note. And of course, I've been learning Russian for several years. Wouldn't say I'm particularly amazing in Russian, especially because I learned over 10 languages. You can check that out probably in other videos on my channel where I speak in those. You can see my levels. But definitely Russian, even after a lot of time here, is probably only language number 7, number 8, I would think. I definitely speak better French, Italian, English, German. What else am I going to say? Portuguese for sure. Maybe, I don't know if my Dutch is as good anymore. It probably sucks. Probably my Russian's better than my Dutch. If you don't maintain languages, they tend to atrophy or fade away as a competence. So my languages that I spoke really well 5 or 6 years ago because I was just in that country, or I was in that environment, and now I don't use it. So, and Russian I obviously use when I'm here every day because I speak in Russian in Odessa. So we are in Ukraine. The official language of the country is Ukrainian. But this city, the language that's used most in daily conversations on the street when you go to shops is Russian. It's overwhelmingly Russian. You're definitely not going to hear very much Ukrainian spoken here. You can, of course, speak in Ukrainian if you are Ukrainian speaking. No one's going to be angry at you or something if you speak Ukrainian. It's completely cool with everybody. But this city is predominantly Russian speaking. So Russian is a big international language. It's one that I started learning many years ago, and that has been a real struggle for me compared to the other languages that I learned. It's taken me a lot longer to get to a good level, and being able to use it here and just reap the reward, the fruits of my labor in terms of what I invested in learning it. That's a huge incentive to spend time in this city, in Odessa. Now, in Ukraine in general, of course, it's not the official language, and it's not the language spoken by the majority of Ukrainians. You have to be clear about that. But in big cities that a lot of you guys are going to go to, it is still the main language, no matter what Ukrainian language nationalists might say or write in my comments or troll me about. That's just the reality, and I'm giving you this information so that you can have the Tsar experience. You can come here and you can get the most out of it. So I always say you should learn Russian first, unless you're going to spend a lot of time in the west of Ukraine, like Lviv, which is a really beautiful city. If you're going to spend your time there, then definitely need to learn Ukrainian before Russian, because it's the main language and it will just go a lot further for you. But Russian is a big international language. It's a bit like the debate maybe between learning Spanish and Catalan. Even if you live in Barcelona, I know it's Catalonia, like Spanish is such a much more valuable and useful language for you most likely in your entire life, and when you travel to Latin America, etc., that you should learn Spanish first. And I think if you spend a lot of time in Barcelona, I did learn some Catalan. I never lived in Catalonia, but I did go and spend 6 months learning the language, and I did use it when I went to Catalonia, and people were really surprised that a foreigner had actually gone and learned Catalan. So I think you should definitely go and do that if you're going to spend a lot of time in the country. So if you learn Russian, then of course you should go, once you get a good level, and learn Ukrainian as well. But the reality is, like, you can travel over the former Soviet Union and basically use Russian as a lingua franca. So obviously Russia itself, Belarus, Central Asia, and you meet Russians are kind of everywhere these days as well. So you're actually going to use it in different countries. So there's 50 million Ukrainian speakers, and there's like probably there's over 300 million people who speak Russian, maybe it's 350 million. So there you go, that's your return on investment is going to be higher. They're both as difficult if you only speak English beforehand, for sure, because I didn't speak any other Slavic language. So definitely I would recommend that you go and learn Russian first. Here in Ukraine, it's completely fine to use Russian in any of the cities that you're likely to visit. So here in Odessa, Dnipro, Kharkov, Kiev, definitely Russian is definitely the main language still used in those big cities. If you go to Lviv, as I said, Ukrainian is the opposite. Ukrainian is number one. It's overwhelmingly Ukrainian speaking. You can, of course, use Russian in the center of the city. Not everyone's going to reply to you in Russian, but it's not a problem if you're in the very touristic center there and that beautiful market square and all the places. People will understand. They may reply to you in Ukrainian, but it's perfectly fine to use Russian. A lot of people actually do speak Russian there, because they just have a lot of Russian spoken by people who visit. But if you are going to hang out there like I did, I actually went there to learn Ukrainian, then definitely go and invest your time in that. So that's the fifth reason. It's language, it's linguistic. I also went to learn Belarusian a little bit. I was invited there. I didn't make my videos yet, so you haven't seen them on the channel. I actually need to go back to Belarus because it rained every bloody day that I was in Belarus for the 10 days learning Belarusian. I had 3 hours, one-to-one tuition. And in that time, yeah, we only spoke Belarusian, so I actually got up to a good level. So I've actually also learned that language a little bit, so I can tell you about that. Just got a little fly in my back. So I'm going to round out this episode of the podcast. They're the 5 reasons girls and beautiful women are definitely one of them. But I think for spending time in Ukraine, it's a combination of those 5 factors why I chose to live here. I'm sure you can relate to a lot of that. So that rounds out this episode of the Vodka Podcast with me, Connor Klein. This is our experience. If you're new to the channel, help the channel out. Give the video a thumbs up. If you've lasted this long to get to the end of it, you must have enjoyed it, got value out of it. And definitely squeeze the red subscribe button after you strike the like. And whack the notification bell beside it, because otherwise you don't get notified when I upload new videos. I'm uploading about twice a week at the moment. We'll try and push that to 3. Let's see how we get on. But I've been making a lot of content here in Odessa, and it's end of summer, so maybe as we go into winter, it'll be a few less videos. If you have visited Ukraine, and if you have good reasons that I haven't mentioned to come here and spend time in this city, then please leave me a comment below. Building this great community. I do get a lot of trolls, like I mentioned. The particular troll in the beginning, but he inspired this video, so now it's not all trolling is counterproductive. But there are people who really try to help each other out there in the comments and really give great personal advice and experience from being here. So don't think that your personal experience, if you've interacted with Ukrainians, visited Ukraine, isn't going to help someone else. So definitely leave a comment there. Become part of this Tsar community of I know, what are you, Tsaristas, Tsarinians? I'm not really sure what name I should give you guys. Maybe drop me a comment like that as well, if you find it interesting enough. And let me know what your top reasons for coming to Ukraine are, and whether you think girls should be the #1 priority for coming here, whether they are worth all that, if they're worth prioritizing number 2, and whether you think they are actually the most beautiful in the world, because I'm going to be making videos on that topic as well very soon. I'm going to stop rambling. There's another photo session going on in front of me for a wedding couple. So as I was saying, this is wedding season. And with that, I bid you all an amazing afternoon if you're watching in my time zone, evening if you're watching this in Asia, and if you're in North America, it's going to be morning if we were doing all this live, which of course we're not. And I will see you and all your smiling, enthusiastic faces for traveling in Eastern Europe in the next video. Do svidaniya, do побачення from Odessa, Ukraine.
SAR Experience.